My good friend Juliette Price is a proud graduate of SUNY Oneonta, and she was such an outstanding individual when we were planning SUNY's future almost 10 years ago now. When Juliette went to the microphone, everybody went, wow, who's this? We hired her at SUNY, and she did a lot of good work in community relations. And when we set about building a community of practice in Albany to seal the leaks in the education pipeline, which I say all the time, but I hope you understand that's like birth to kindergarten, kindergarten to third, high school to college to career. We're losing people all along the way, and so Albany has taken a real stab at trying to fill in those gaps and retain more students who deserve a good education. So Juliette is the director, CEO, president, viscount, whatever amazing titles we could give her for the Albany Promise, and really has become a student and an instructor of improvement science. And she has set about working with teams to solve problems. And we thought she could tell us about one of the problems of practice that she's been working on. And so Juliette, we're thrilled to have you. I think we're going to have a split screen or some kind of technology that allows us to see your PowerPoint and hear your voice. Anything more about your introduction that you want to add? And please take over.
Great. Well, thanks for everyone being here, and I hope everyone can hear me all right. So I'm happy to be here with you and some familiar faces like Josephine. We worked on the Master Teacher Program together, and of course under Nancy's leadership for many years at SUNY. So I too was new to all of this at one point in time, even though it ages you quickly and you feel like you've been in it for hundreds of years. But I'm really excited to share a little bit of what I've learned. As Nancy was saying, we're going to walk through one very specific example, but I'm also happy to talk about some of our more recent work here in Albany, some other areas, give you guys a flavor of what this all looks like. And David, I think, has passed along. There are also some opportunities for you all to get involved locally if you are local with some things that we're doing. So with that, I am going to pull.
Juliette, if you could actually just pitch it directly. I listed the site in the syllabus, but you should mention it.
Oh, sure. Okay, yeah, I will talk about that. Okay, so I think this works. I think you're seeing what I'm seeing, hopefully. Yep, I'm getting the nod from Josephine. Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to walk through. I'm going to walk through these slides with you, just to kind of ground our conversation. And you'll get these slides later, so don't feel like you have to take notes or anything. So the problem of practice that we want to dive into here is something that Albany Promise really stumbled upon a number of years ago, and it's what has come to be known nationally as this concept of summer melt. And I'll get into what exactly that means and how we came about finding out about it and what we did about it. But really, just to ground us, we're talking about post-secondary enrollment. We're really in the area of the pipeline where we're thinking about what happens to the students who successfully graduate high school and have intentions to go on to post-secondary work. So, I have to use the button. Okay. So really, in our partnership, we use something that we call results-based facilitation. So just, we're very clear about what we are going to be talking to you about and what the results are going to be. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Albany Promise's work to innovate here locally, an approach that reduced the rate of summer melt. I'm going to then take you to the North Country of New York, so right by the Canadian border, to talk a little bit about how that improvement community tackled the same problem. And then I'll end by talking about how the New York State Education Department, New York State as a whole, has latched on to this idea and is starting to take this work to scale. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start my story here in Albany because, as I think probably all of you know, good ideas don't just come about randomly. We had convened a group of passionate individuals around this idea of how many students from our comprehensive high school go on to any form of post-secondary education. And this was an interesting group of folks. So there were guidance counselors, there were college access providers, there were people from local colleges and universities, all around a common table. And one of the things that bubbled up, as you probably well know, is we didn't really have a handle on what the problem really was, right? And so this is where that concept of problem definition comes in real quickly. Is there were lots of people around the table, but they didn't all have the same understanding of what the problem was. So some people thought the problem was that not enough second graders were going on college tours to be aspirational and inspire children to want to go. Other people wanted to talk about, well, even if they do go, do they persist? And so one of the key tools that we use is really using data to break down those conversations and really get to the heart of defining the problem. And one of the things that came up right away was that our high school didn't actually know how many of their students actually enrolled in a form of post-secondary after high school. In New York State, as in many states, the high school system is only held accountable to giving our state education department what's known as the senior exit survey results. So we actually poll students in high school as they're like leaving, as they're going out the door. And we sort of say like, hey, where are you going to be this fall? And they answer, honestly or not, right? There are lots of bias in what they tell us is going to happen. And so, you know, that becomes the numerator and the denominator becomes, well, how many high school seniors did we have? And in this conversation that we were having locally, we were struck by the high rate that the folks from the high school were talking about, especially for a large urban high school that has struggled persistently with graduation, dropout, all of the things that we see in a lot of challenging high schools. We were a little surprised to hear reported that there was this really high rate of college going. And so what we offered to do was build that data infrastructure and say, well, if that's what the students are telling us, how do we compare that against what is actually happening? And we worked with the school district to establish a connection with the National Student Clearinghouse, which reports on about 99% of of universities in the United States. And when we brought the results back to the team, what we had figured out was that there was a large percentage and large number of students who were what we call college intending. So they had done all of the work, they had applied, they had been accepted. And during these last few months of high school, something had happened to them. And when we started this was a new area of research. There were really only a few articles about this. And now this has gained some research backing through lots of different folks, a lot of them at UVA and Penn. But I just want to walk you through what is the technical definition of summer melt. It's what we call college intending students. So you'll see here they've completed an application. They've been accepted either to a 2-year or a 4-year institution. They may have paid a deposit. They have to have graduated high school. So they really are on their way. And then what ends up happening is that high school ends in mid-June, and they have the months of July, August, and September. And what we see is that those college intending students somehow are not in their seats in the beginning of the academic year. And what we know about this phenomenon on the macro level is that they encounter a range of obstacles during those summer months. So those 3 months can lead them to change or abandon their plans for college. We have more nuanced data coming out, but we know that about 20 to 40% of college intending students melt away during these last 3 months. We know that there is a greater chance for melt for students from low-income households, and specifically those enrolling in two-year colleges. So when we had this local conversation and we compared the data of what the students were telling us they were intending to do and the actual enrollment that fall, we found about a 25% summer melt rate, which translated to about 66 students who did not successfully transition into their post-secondary institution. And so this obviously raised a lot of questions. What is going on? What is causing all of this? And really the research is kind of research and personal experience here and in other communities has really delved into just a couple things. And the first I think I want to just sort of say is the matriculation process is quite complex. And so it's not as easy as applying, getting accepted, showing up on day one, right? And for those of you in higher ed, you know this very well. All of a sudden in the summer, there are lots of mailings that start happening, both physical and email. Most colleges have orientation sessions that you must attend, whether it's in person, online, combination of both. There are typically financial aid barriers. FAFSA verification has nearly tripled in the last 2 years. Sometimes it's just as simple as paying the tuition bill, knowing when to pay it, how much of it do you really need to pay, all of these things. There are student fees, room and board at a 2-year school and 4-year school, but predominantly at 2-year school, you can't choose classes before you're placed in exams. So it's actually a very complex transition, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. One key structural issue came out very early on, and that was that structurally in K-12, our high school guidance counselors do not work during the summer. So they're 10-month employees. And so after the students graduate, they're usually around for maybe a month or so. And then they're gone. They're gone for the summer. So that when students encounter these barriers, they have lost the person with whom they had the closest relationship in terms of the college going experience. Higher ed, and I feel comfortable coming from that sector. And as Nancy said, we have to be, critical of our own family here. We don't make it very easy for people to understand where to go. The word registrar is not something that a 16-year-old really knows what it means. And it's not very clear why the Office of Student Engagement is different from the Office of Student Affairs, is different from any other office on campus. And so it's very hard for 16-year-olds to understand what this crazy structure is that we've built. For those of you who work in districts where students have been chronically underinvested in, you'll know this one very well. Our families are challenged, and surprise events can happen. A parent can lose a job. A parent can be sick. All kinds of things can happen that the family and the student may not have been planning for. First generation students, those who are the first in their family or sometimes their social circle to go to college, they may lack experience with the college going process, and they may not have anyone to turn to. And I think this was really clear to us the more we dug into this, is how many people, how much of our own privilege had come to shape our own experiences. And so lots of people who were the guidance counselors, the college access folks, they, when we were forced to think back to well, what did we do? A lot of our answers became, well, I asked my mom, I asked my dad, I asked, whatever. And of course, those people had gone through this process. So at least there was a point of reference. And that's not the case for first generation students. So I like talking about two very clear, tangible examples of people that we met in this very first summer when we started our work. This one young woman, whose name is not really Amanda, came and we encountered her. She was 16 years old. She had just graduated high school. She knew very clearly she wanted to pass a 2-year school into a 4-year school to get a business degree. She had researched all of her options. She was headed for a 2-year college that has an articulation agreement with a 4-year college. And so she was by all means, very much well prepared. a very impressive 16-year-old. And so when we asked her, you know, what is it? Why are you here? What's the problem? She responded, I applied for financial aid, but I never heard back. And so without financial aid, I can't possibly attend this university. So I'm here to figure out what my plan B is. And all it really took was a college professional sitting down with this young lady, sign her into her portal of financial aid, and she hadn't accepted her award. She didn't know that that was the process with which she needed to accept the award. She was a fully funded Pell, which is obviously federal, fully funded TAP, which is our state dollars, and she actually had earned an institutional scholarship to cover room and board and everything else. And so I tell this story because, you know, it becomes so evident that she was quite literally a button click away from giving up on her college going plan. So while this is all very complicated, you know, these are real problems affecting real students. So I think my key takeaways on talking a little bit about the problem before I start talking to you about the improvement network and what we did is really the problems, the reasons why a student will melt are what I have started calling, you know, they're molehills that become mountains. They are not academic. The majority of the college going activities have been completed. Counselors work with students for 4 years, sometimes even in some school districts, they bring them through the middle school, so maybe 6 years. Their high school degree has been completed, so it's not that they're falling academically short of where they should be. But very small obstacles become overwhelming very quickly. We had folks who didn't know how to, you know, prove their residency if you're attending a 2-year college. They didn't know what a notary was, and they certainly didn't know where to find one. And I think this last point is important because as we all work in these cross-sector problems, it was no single person's job to ensure that students didn't get lost along the way. And so you can't specifically hold the high school guidance counselor responsible because they're off in the summer. And you couldn't specifically hold the college, you know, in either admissions or student affairs folks responsible because they didn't have all the information about the student's high school experience. And so it becomes one of these nitty situations where it's both no one's job and everyone's job at the same time. And yet what we know about accountability and roles, that's a recipe for disaster, right? And so that's kind of a bad way to start things. So what did we do? So I told you a little bit about how we got here. We identified a melt rate, specifically in Albany. And when we brought this information back, and I tell this story because I think it illustrates the power of data. When we brought that hard data back to the counselors and the whole group, the counselors came to us this next meeting, and they interrupted me. I was the facilitator, and they said, "Can we have something to say?" And I said, "You know, of course." And they said, "You know, the two of us who sit on this committee, we reported this back to the other counselors at the high school, and none of us slept. And the next day, we all clearly got into the office, and we basically pushed everything that was on our docket aside and said, yes, it's May. Yes, we don't have a lot of time, but we need to do something, and we need to do something now. And this is not a commission that's going to put out a report for the next 10 years. We need to think and innovate for this class." And they said, you know, what we came up with is we're all willing to stay past, you know, when we usually leave and host basically a one last seminar, one last touch point with our students to see where they are and guide them on the next step. And that's what we'd be willing to stand and do and change our practice. And what that led the conversation to do is to say, well, why couldn't we do that after you all are on vacation? And so the team recruited college professionals, so folks from financial aid, admissions offices. You know, we used our connections, our relationships to bring this issue to other colleges in the area. And we hosted these drop-in sessions, and you'll see on the right-hand side, you know, these were couple hours every Monday at the public library. Anyone could come by, and that's how we found these students. And that's what we did in the first year. Oops, before I go on. That's what we did in the first year. And I'll say this, and I think Tony spoke to it. I tried watching the video as much as I could today. He spoke to this. It's like, you don't have to boil the ocean. You don't have to take on 2,500 students. We saw 8 students that summer. That's less than 10, more than 7, right? They all came to us with an issue that was standing in their way. And 100% of those 8 students successfully enrolled in college that fall. Not, you know, reported to us, but we were able to see in the National Student Clearinghouse data, those kids made it. And so it was really when we saw that, I mean, looking back, I would have been happy with like 50%, but we looked at ourselves and just went like, we are on to something. And this really worked. This very low touch intervention really worked. And one of the tools, and I'm sure you guys will talk a lot about different tools that you can use. One of the tools that we found to be really useful in this process was we realized that people didn't know the process that other institutions were using. And so the concept of process mapping, it really comes from industrial design, but it's an ability to say like, okay, tell me exactly, not just like, hey, kids have to apply to college, but give me the rundown. What is every step? What is every form? And so we did these process maps, and in year 2, we got very specific about them. And so we process mapped the, you know, basically spring to fall transition at every college in our area. So we became very, very knowledgeable about what are all the possible places where people, where students could fall through the chart, through the cracks. What I always highlight is the process map allows you to do something that normal conversation will not allow you to do, right? If you have a conversation with more than 3 people about a process, everyone's bringing their own assumptions. And so what the process map does is it lays bare what exactly happens, not in an ideal state, not what we think happens, but what are actually the steps. And it allows other people who may not be from that specific sector to say, oh, I had no idea you needed a copy of transcripts after they graduated high school. Well, let me see if I can't just do that on my end so that the student's not responsible. And so just like in my hiking example here, it allows you to get to the granular pieces of like, well, if I want to go hiking more quickly, I want to get to the trailhead on time, what are the specific pieces of this process that I need to break down and improve? And it really creates the conditions for people to be able to say, yeah, we can move those mountains, right? And not just say this is really overwhelming. So the pathway, what we realized is that, and I hope that eventually, and I'll send this to David, I hope you will read the article about the water systems change, because really what you're doing in any and all of this work is the core piece is you're changing people's mental models. And so oftentimes when we would go and work with high-level university administrators, they didn't even know that this was a problem, because when you think about who's in those roles, what are their privileges, where are they coming from, this was the process map in their head, right? There's a great graduation party when we're done with high school. There's cake and friends. Everybody has like a fun summer job as a lifeguard, and then we show up on day 1. And what we were able to do was really change people's mental models by using this mapping and saying, actually, it's a much deeper, much more complex, you know, set of steps that has to happen. This isn't even, this one here, you'll see some others in a minute, but this one here is not even the complete map of all the pieces. But this is sort of, I'm just sort of giving you a little bit of context of this is why we did the things, the process in this way. And so this is just one of my favorite Albert Einstein quotes, right? We all know this. It's sort of like doing it more and more in the same way is not going to get us the results that we want. And so what we slowly but surely came to find in years 2 is that there are actually many, many cities that are wrestling with this problem. You see here the summer melt rates that we've been able to gather from certain cities. We're working on a project this year, which is expanding this a little bit, but what we found out is that most places have a really bad articulation between their high school and post-secondary connection. And so I want you to think about these, right? They kind of hover, you know, between 20 and 40%. But when you're thinking about, you know, large school districts like Boston or Philadelphia or Baltimore, that translates to hundreds and thousands of students every single year who are not making it, even though they've really gone 99% of the way. And so in year 2, we tried something a little different. We decided we could be a network of networks, and we gathered some other folks who were leading some collective impact partnerships across New York State. And what we basically tried to do was replicate this. And this was the kickoff meeting in New York City. And so we had Queens, Astoria, Long Island City, and Astoria, Queens there. We had the South Bronx. We had Harlem. And I think we had one other site that's escaping me. And we basically brought everybody through this same process. This was their first day. You'll see they have the current state process map. And everybody left with an action plan that they went ahead and delivered on. We went to places outside of New York City. So we had Yonkers and Rochester and Geneva and upstate in the North Country work on it. And we basically brought everyone through the very same process. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the North Country found and what they did, because they also brought together folks. They had SUNY Plattsburgh and Clinton Community College. They had 4 school districts, and so they were building their own improvement community. And the region started, I'm taking these slides from the person who leads the network up there. They had heard a little bit about the work that we had been doing, which I'm sure David and Nancy will get to, is how do these things spread? People had heard that we had been doing this work and they were interested, and so they invited us in to help work with them. One of the first things that we did was that we added this component of making sure that there was a shared goal statement. And so we worked with all of the teams to become very clear. And I think someone said it in the introductions, like, I'm thinking about a lot of things, but we're not there quite yet. It was the assistant principal. You know, there's this issue of disproportionality, but have we gotten to the point where we have really defined what it is we're going to work on? And that is really incredibly important. And so when we facilitated these, we actually made every team come up with a goal statement, and you can see it's very clear, right? It's not talking about all parts of the pipeline. It's really just talking about summer melt. This was their process map. So you can see there were lots of fun pieces to it, including probably my favorite, an online portal for which the password was physically mailed to you. And then if you lost your password, they would physically, it felt like we were in 1802. What we then did, we really took people through, after they built their own process map, they built their own action plans. So I'm sure, as you'll talk about, you know, improvement communities are not run by the facilitator, especially because you're not the one that's going to be doing the work. And so everybody left with a list of what they were going to do, and this is a format that we use. It's pretty simple. What is the action item? By when will it be accomplished? And by who? And we definitely, especially early on, we really embraced the concept of don't let perfect be the enemy of good, and really getting people to just try and move towards something. What Clinton, so if you don't know the North Country, this is really, this is up by the Canadian border, very large land areas, so there can be significant transportation problems, especially when students aren't connected to school buses and things like that. And Clinton Community College was in the room, and they basically said, well, why don't we, because this transportation problem just kept coming up, how are kids going to get to Clinton County to be doing all these things? And so what Clinton County said was, well, why don't we just innovate? Why don't we just have the last day of school be for all of the students who are intending to enroll in Clinton Community College? We will pay for the bus to pick them up, They will get brought over to the college, and we'll just do a one-day, you know, all in for your high school students, get them through as much of these steps as they possibly can. So they tried that. It was very successful. They do that to this day. They're in their third year of doing this. They also, this little flyer that you see here, one of the things that we encourage folks to do is talk to end users. So in this case, talk to students. What were they finding was tripping them up? And one of the things that they identified was they weren't, they may not be great self-advocates just yet. And so sometimes just the direction to like call the student office, it felt scary to them. They didn't know who they were looking for. The person on the other end of the line might be a little cranky that day. They didn't really know what they were talking about. And so you'll see on this flyer, there are actual names next to people's phone numbers. And so that really helps people get to a sense of like, when you call, you're empowered to ask for a very specific person or a very specific office instead of just saying, call the college if this doesn't work out for you.
Hey, Juliette.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm going to say. We're 10 minutes from closure. I love the very methodical way you have taken us through this experience. I see that you didn't dial up an expert on summer melt from the University of Virginia or wherever. How come?
So we partially did. We definitely talked to the folks. So Lindsay Page is at Penn, and I'm blanking on his Ben Castleton is at UVA. And we talked to them. And I think one of the main reasons we didn't try and get them to come to all these sessions or anything was they really pushed back and said from their experience, they had learned that it was really, the problems were really local. And so they gave us a really great structure of like, here's some things to be looking out for. Things like, are you being clear with students on who to call? Are you, you know, they gave us a framework, but they actually really recused themselves and said, like, we don't feel like we'd be all that helpful because that's all we could tell you. We'd have to do the work with you guys of digging into the local context.
So when you dive into positive deviance, it's going to kind of make a point about local solutions and how to use expertise and frankly, how not to. I'm going to just take a minute here. It's such a good example, but we obviously can't finish it within the time of the class. I'm sure Juliette will share the whole PowerPoint with David so that we can see how the story concluded. But of our members here, anything quickly that you want to toss at Juliette to increase our understanding?
I'm curious. If you could speak to like slide 1, when it was bringing people together, did the group expand? I mean, I'm guessing there were some automatic people you invited, but then did you find that other people also had to join the conversation?
So we actually found that people needed to leave the conversation. I know, what an opposite of what we all think, right? And not to put Nancy on the spot, but Nancy's written a really great blog post about this. I think in collective impact, which is, you know, the theory that we're drawing from, we tend to overemphasize the collective. And what I mean by that is in those first meetings, when we had like the college access people and the people who just cared about college going mentality and all of these people, we weren't really getting anywhere because the problem hadn't been defined, right? Because there's some truth in that, right? Yeah, okay, it would be great if we sent more elementary school students on tours of campuses. Absolutely, that would be great exposure. But the people who do that work are not the people who are going to help solve summer melt. And so what we've learned along the way is you start up here with like a really big issue, and then you kind of like reduce. So you might have a group working on summer melt, and you might have a group working on making sure every third grade class goes to college for a tour. They're not the same people. They don't necessarily need to be in the same network, right? They can't have meetings together because, and this is something that I think David pointed to, there needs to be vulnerability in these meetings. People are going to have to be radically honest about what a bad job they're currently doing, right? Like that's the essential, you know, when I think about like the two truths people have to hold in their hands, everyone will always tell you they're doing a great job at what they do. If that is true, then how are we getting the outcomes that we're getting? And to break past that, that's where all of the teaming and the vulnerability, a principal of a high school, a guidance counselor is never going to say that to you. I have no idea what happens to our kids. If the room is packed with 50 people and it's, you know, everybody and they're just never going to do that, right? And so you have to kind of carefully control who's in the room. You have to make it psychologically safe, and you have to allow for people to be vulnerable to say, yeah, you know what, I don't really know what's going on. Because then your next, right, like your next response is like, no worries, we're all here, we can help.
I recall in some instances where we were, people were blaming each other. And the school district was talking about low graduation rates. And then I had to report the graduation rates of my university, which were a third less than the graduation rate at the high school that was in the barrel. And that's like shared vulnerability. And I would say, if you could have gotten somebody from the admissions office to come there and also say, we don't know where these students are, it would go a long way to break down the whose fault is this anyway, which is a big problem of problem solving. So I'm glad you asked that question. So in 4 minutes, do you get a feel for how we're going to go through all this and learn from each other? And in the end, read a lot about other people's experiences, but also hear a lot and take these field trips. And I think we will also have a discussion group this week too, David, or are we waiting till week 2?
We do have a discussion group that's already available to everybody, and it's to build on these reflections. I just want to point out, I posted it to the chat group, but Juliette, the this very topic, CEW has a great video on this. About, they estimated that it's 500,000 students a year that we lose like this right now, which is extraordinary.
Camille, did you raise your hand or were you waving?
I have a question because I'm all new to this. How do I do a discussion group? Is it on the Blackboard or how do we do that?
On the Blackboard, and hopefully I've deliberately tried to make the instructions redundant enough that hopefully it's clear.
Okay, so I need to do I did it once, but I need to do it again. Say again? So I did the Blackboard introduction one time, so I guess I need to do it again. Is that where I have to look at the thread?
Yeah, it's
yeah, okay.
A thread, exactly. But if you run into any trouble, just email me and I'll help you out.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you for asking that, Anita. This is more than painful for me. I have no skills in this regard. And so just hang in there. We'll get it figured out.
They don't make it simple. It's a clunky software, unfortunately.
So Juliette, I just can't thank you enough. You had a lot of things to do tonight that you could have done without this session, and you could have taped it, put it in the can and sent it, but we wanted people to see a real champion for this kind of work and how they broke this problem down. And I love the size of it, and I love that process map. I actually attended one of the sessions where it literally started with the alarm clock. Okay, I get up in the morning and then I brush my teeth. And it's the little things of life that stop people from doing the great things. And that's all about the science of improvement that we're about to launch into. So I don't know where all the men are, but I'm thrilled that you women are here. And maybe it is true that we will run the world someday. And so we're getting ready. And I think, Nicole, I hope you're okay and you feel better. I don't see you anymore, but that's maybe because you're just too sick to even share yourself. And I understand that. And thank you.
I'm here. I just figured I'd turn it off so that way.
I feel your pain. So anyway, I want to publicly thank David again for the work he's doing to make this course a really class act, and for all of you who are coming. And I hope you'll stay the course. We are an experiment that's very important to future training in this field. And so we're going to really grow along together. I hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you online. And if I can find out how to transfer my next video to you for what we're doing on week 2, which is on my phone, but not in the Dropbox, and I don't know why, you will then hear me talking about what we're going to do next week. And we're going to do that every week. Everybody okay?
Can I ask one question real quick?
Sure.
I was just curious for Juliette, just how many institutions you have currently in the network, and also how often do you communicate with those institutions?
So specifically for summer melt, or for some of the
Summer melt, yes.
Yeah. So last year we worked with 15 what I call sites. So we let them decide, did they want to go? We had some schools within, larger school districts say like, I want to do this. That's great. We had some cities go in at it. And then we had some places where the North Country, where they were like, they're a 12 county region. So I just called them sites, and we let them decide like where they want to go. But we had 12 of them. No, we had 15 of them. We had 15 of them all across New York State. And it's continued to kind of be this, like, people are hearing about it. And so we're aiming to have more involved this next summer.